Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I'm Derek Lambert, the host. If you're new here, like the video, share this with a friend, comment down below. I have a special guest, and I say special all the time when I introduce guests, but this guest of mine is a very close friend who's been around Myth Vision circles for a long time. They've been a fan of our work and what we've done as a We Are Myth Vision family. Ricky Johnson, and he's going to be telling his story from cradle to where he is today. And it will be different from what you've usually heard in deconversion stories on this channel, probably ideas you've never heard of. I hope that everybody in the chat will give him a warm welcome and continue to admonish him for coming forward with the courage to tell his story. Ricky, welcome to Myth Vision.
Hey, Derek, thanks for having me on. I'm so happy to be here because, it's been, I think 2018 is when I came across your channel. So it's been hanging around in the chat for a long time, and
yeah, man,
it's awesome to be on.
Yeah, and you've always been encouraging, an advocate, supportive. And that does not mean you had to agree with everything under the sun that we've ever had on the channel, but like you've been there in the corner. And recently I just took a turn and said, let me get people's stories from what I would consider high control or even mentally high control type of ideas that we've broken the shackles on. And so what I typically do in these, Ricky, is I get you to tell us your social security number and your banking account. So everybody, oh, I'm sorry. No, wrong show. If you don't mind taking us through your life, whatever you feel comfortable explaining and whatever you feel like discussing that you can recall, I will do my best as a host here to compliment, I ask the viewers as well, as I try to do, relate and see if there's something relatable to bounce with you as we go through your life. And I ask everyone to also show you encouragement along the way, but we're going to get to where you are today. And usually that journey is where the magic happens. So Ricky, without further ado, introduce yourself. Who's Ricky? Where is he born? Is his parents extremely religious? What kind of Christianity or belief system were you raised in? Take us wherever you want to start.
All right, well, we'll start. I was born in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It's way up north. So if Michigan's like a hand, and then at the top there's like a rabbit's thumb. I'm way up here, so we get like at least 300 inches of snow in the winter. There's a lot of snow out there right now. I spent most of my life here. I think I only moved away for maybe 2 years, something like that. And it's when I was real young, I was probably, I'd say probably 5, 6 years old, maybe 7 years old. I realized that like the religion that I was in was a little different than the rest. So like the neighbor kids had TV. We didn't have TV. I think probably awareness wise, like I said, 5 or 6 years old is a little different. And so here I am, like, desperate to watch TV or cartoons, and the neighbor kids have them. And at the time, I didn't really understand like exactly why. Like you kind of realize like, nobody else in the church family, stuff like that, has television. But I didn't really think about it like too much. And so I'd go over to the neighbor's kid's house to watch TV. And as you're getting older, 7, 8, you start to realize you're a little bit different than the rest. And at preaching at church was really, there's like one preacher I remember specifically when I was younger was real fire and brimstone. So there's a little bit of that. You're sitting there like the fear of hell is being pounded in you as a little kid. So like all the things that I felt like even were me at a young age, I felt like I was disconnected. Even at a young age, I realized I was, different than the rest, like the square peg in a round hole type of thing. But yet, since you're dogmatically pounded in your head about hell and stuff like that, I always figured, well, even growing up my whole life is like, well, I'm going to eventually believe this religion and be a better person and be what I'm supposed to be and stuff like that. But
Right.
I was trying to balance who I was with like what the church was teaching. And so,
If I may, Ricky, just to make sure I understand, what kind of church doctrine, like what denomination was this?
well, it's a Lutheran, it's basically a Pietist Lutheran revivalist movement that started in northern Sweden in the mid 19th century. So like they had a prophet, his name was Lars Levi Lestadius. So it's a Listadian religion. So it started way up north in what they called Lapland in northern Sweden, and then he was like he had like a what do you call it, an awakening in the mid 19th century where he saw like the path that led to eternal life. This is after I had a conversation with someone that confirmed that they could see something different in him and that he was a true believer. And
Mhm.
so even though we might say, well, it's a new religion, it started in the 19th century, the church will say, well, no, this is in the lineage from Jesus. You can draw a plumb line from Jesus to the Laestadian movement, and Luther in between and stuff like that. And so they would, people have said over the years too, he's like the seventh angel that you would find in Revelation, who's like, well, not more divine but earthly, that's like spreading an awakening message. And so it's funny because, like, as a little kid, I'm here. They read the Laestadius sermon first, so they'll do like a song and a prayer, another song, and then they'll read a Laestadius sermon. They have books of Laestadius' sermons that there's many volumes of them and stuff. So they'll read that, and so, like, as a young little kid growing up, I always thought Laestadius was a guy that was in the Bible because priority number one in the religion. And
Yeah.
it wasn't until I got a little bit older, early teens or something, it's like, "Oh, wait a minute, this is just, this is a guy, like, not
So
in the Bible."
if I were to analogize this, it's almost like Joseph Smith,
Yeah,
in a
exactly.
sense, a
Yeah,
prophet-like figure,
yeah,
though he points to Jesus, he points to the Christ, he points to the New Testament. That's still part of your canon, all of that. But you didn't really know him. You were like a fish born in water that doesn't know they're swimming in water. This is your world, and you can't
yeah.
watch TV, and they probably can't do other activities like
No,
other
yeah.
kids.
Alcohol was the thing that they talked about the most because there was a problem with alcohol in northern Sweden at the time, and that's what he really became fire and brimstone's sermons against alcohol. And then there were people that did stop drinking and stuff like that. So it's there's a whole history there that people could go look into the Listadian movement and see what started the whole thing, and how it grew and stuff like that. But basically, I said alcohol is the big thing that was happening, so that's where like the biggest revival movement came, is getting people off alcohol and stuff, which is a good thing, but also you're doing it in a way where you're scaring people with this version of hell, and like hell is on the line. It's good that they're if they turn away from alcohol and stuff like that, that's a good thing, but you're creating this dogmatic religion that is I think is abusive to people,
Mm,
psychologically abusive, because you're conditioning people to be afraid of their who their true self is, and you're conditioning people to be afraid of like what their natural inclinations would be, and acting as if they're always because they'll you're born a sinner, and so there's always this oppression of you're a sinner, you got to have this heavy weight on your conscience. And then in the religion, you'll have this it's necessary to repent, and repent verbally to other believers, and then they'll declare that your sins are forgiven in Jesus' holy name and in his precious reconciling blood. And that while they're doing this, they're hugging each other and weeping. So there's this big
mm.
forgiveness movement that happens. So it's like whenever you're supposed to, feel yourself down in the depths of hell, basically, for your sinful self, and then you're going to feel this joy over the forgiveness of sins. And so, as you're embracing each other and weeping, and the thing is too is like I noticed a lot of people would, when they ask forgiveness, would ask the same thing from the next person, next person, next person, over and over. And then I also thought it was interesting too because like you're weeping and somebody's testifying your sins forgiven through Jesus's name and blood, but yet you're repenting the same sin to another person. Like that it seemed odd to me that you should have to do that more than once.
Oh, so in just so I'm wrapping my head around this, because this is a really interesting, different than what we usually see. You're saying the congregation would go around as part of
Yeah,
their, would they do this
different.
weekly and they would go around
Yeah,
and
to
they'd
different
almost like,
individuals you would ask forgiveness for. So, and then also people go up to the altar and ask forgiveness from the preachers, and there'd be a long line there too. So like forgiveness movement sometimes, especially on a like when you're doing communion Sunday, could last a long time because people are asking forgiveness, and it's a way. There's like a drowning, wailing sound from people crying and stuff, and so um,
what do you recall why that the forgiveness movement like that was a thing? Because I get it. Altar call, come down. You got the message. They strike the keys in your heart. You're like, oh, I got to go down there and get this. And then they pray, and then everything's better. But like, they took it to a whole nother level, and like running around, telling each other, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me, forgive me, and doing this like,
and it's not like you're forgiving them. It's that you're doing the work. Say they're a true believer, and they believe that they have the keys to the kingdom of heaven. So like, I'm not forgiving them really, but God working through you because you're a true believer, because you have the living faith in you.
yeah.
You're testifying their sins forgiven in Jesus' name and his precious reconciling blood. So it's
And there
not
is
me
a passage
specifically.
that he says, like, the keys are in your hands. You have the right, Peter, and those, who have the keys to
Those
forgive
keys would be,
sins.
yeah.
Yeah.
So these
Okay.
keys are the keys that would go all the way back. Like I said, they say it's a plumb line, because they'll say this is not a new religion. This is Jesus's religion, is what it is.
Right. They all say that.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So how old are
that's
you?
gonna be a big
Like,
part of my story too, is to finding out. Yeah, that's because
you don't know anything else other than this?
that's that's it, because you're warned constantly about the world. They always say keep a stone's throw from the world. So like you'd casually have friends, but not, you don't go their way. You don't, do the things that they do, maybe have them come your way or whatever. But like I said, here I am at a young age on my street, Saturday morning, harassing the neighbors to sit, watch cartoons with them in the morning. And and a funny story related to that is a few years ago, I ran into a guy that was the father of one of the kids that I hung around with. And I said, "You remember me?" I said, "No, I don't remember." I said, "I lived on the same street as you, and he goes, "Oh, you're the kid that used to come over on Saturday mornings and watch TV." And I thought it was so funny, because like, I didn't think about it. I probably woke him up early on Saturday because I was desperate to watch television.
Oh my! And your parents didn't know about this, clearly.
Yeah, I think they did. It was kind of my dad wasn't originally from the church, so there's a whole background there too, which actually I could go back to now when I was like, let's say 6, 7 years old. My dad was big into sports when he joined the church when he was in college. He went to college up in northern Wisconsin, and there was a branch of our church was there. So he ended up meeting someone from there. He went to the church. Then later he ended up meeting my mom, who was in a different congregation where we live now. And so he ended up making repentance in the church, which repentance usually requires you to, you got to understand the church, have that true breaking of the heart, ask for forgiveness. A lot of times they'll have the people go up in front of the whole whole congregation and say, like,
Right.
"Can you forgive me for, my bad example?" And the church will testify, that your sins are forgiven, and you're a true believing Christian and stuff like that. Now, so anyway, he's balancing his life with what he grew up with, which is in the Chicago area, and not this type of dogmatic religion. So he always liked sports and stuff like that, which was always a constant battle for him, because he's always reading the sports paper and, maybe listening to sports on the radio, but couldn't watch them, so he didn't have television. So maybe he'd watch them somewhere else or whatever. And so like, as a little kid, I remember one year he let us go into like biddy ball, and so I played in there a year, and that was fun. But then I don't know what happened. Weren't in there again. But then like in 5th and 6th grade, I was allowed to play basketball in school, which was another big no-no. So we practiced during the week, and Saturdays was games. So 5th and 6th grade, I did that, and I enjoyed that. But then when it's coming to, you're getting a little bit older and stuff like that, when I got to junior high, it was a no-go, because organized sports is wrong and sinful for a variety of reasons. I mean, I think number one is you're going to be spending time with the world, so that's not good, because you're going to be around worldly people. And also they've said stuff like, well, you could be good at sports and then get too full of yourself and create like a god of yourself because you're so good at this. And then plus they'll mention injuries and stuff like that. So like injuries.
Oh, injuries.
Like you get injured and stuff like that.
Right.
Which I always thought was odd too, because like when I got a little bit older too, we'd have a church hockey rental, because hockey's big here. We have ice and snow for 6 months out of the year.
Where are you located? You're right there in Michigan.
It's like Lake Superior is surrounding us. So in fact, my accent is a little bit of Canadian, a little bit of Minnesota, a little bit of Fargo. I get a little bit of the A's and the stuff like that. So
yeah.
So they call us Yoopers up here, because we're way up north. So we're in Upper Peninsula, as they call us Yoopers. So we get the Yooper accent. But anyway, so here I am, playing these sports, and then it's like in junior high, can't play them. And then, like I love playing sports, and there was actually a lot of good athletes in the kids in church and that. But we'd have actually a rental that we'd play hockey on once a week. So we'd have a hockey rental, but we weren't allowed to keep score either because they didn't want tension over and friction over scoring and stuff like that. So we just throw sticks in the middle of the ice, divvy them up, and you got a different team every week. It's just casual guys from church and stuff.
Yeah.
But then, like, in my junior year, I was always like faster and stronger than most of the people that were in gym class and stuff like that. So the gym teacher was also cross country and the track coach. So he took my dad out to lunch, and he convinced him to, like, get Ricky into let him do a track at least, because he's can do the most pull-ups in gym class. He can run fastest, all this stuff. So my dad is like, well, if you want to join track, you can, which kind of stunned me because that was a big no-no and a sin. Like, he would have got rebuked for that, and so would I. But at the time, it was like I would have wanted to play sports, and I had no interest in just running track. I was like, I didn't.
Right.
And then, in that religion too, at a young age, we started smoking. A lot of us would be smoking at 14, 15 years old. We couldn't do a lot, so we'd be cigarettes were like seemed to be okay, and preachers smoked. And then I found out years later that Listadian was a big smoker. So I was like, oh, that's why smoking is okay. So, like, even during confirmation class at 15, we'd be out back behind the church smoking with preachers and stuff.
Wow.
It's quite a unique thing. So
imagine seeing that today. Like, if
I
you saw
know,
teenagers, people would be like, that's horrible. I want to ask you a personal question before we move forward too, actually.
Okay.
First thing, on a scale from 1 to 10, were you all sold out for Jesus? I mean, were you like in this religion? Would you say you were pretty?
I would say I
believing it?
was. I don't know how to describe. Like I would say, like most people that saw me from church, like around when I was around the church congregation, I think I could put on the show enough to show that I like cared enough, or was trying, like I was doing the things I was supposed to be doing,
Yeah.
but I was always considered more like one of the, you know, me and my group of buddies were more like the wild ones, even though
Yeah.
our wild was pretty tame compared to, most people are out partying on the weekends at school, which, so we were smoking, cruising around, listening we were big into heavy metal music and stuff, which was a big sin and a big no-no. So we'd be cruising around listening to, heavy metal music and stuff. But then if you see from people from church, you kind of turn the radio down and you didn't want them to hear you or whatever. So, or we'd be in the arcade playing games, because most of my youth was in late 80s and early 90s is when, that time frame where people are
Well,
seeing you.
look, you got the whole, I mean, even if you look in your background, right, you can see
Oh
you've
yeah.
got a fascination for things.
I like the
So I
pop
guess
culture and all that stuff. So yeah, music was huge for me. So
if I were to ask you though, would you say, yes, I was a believer? I may not have been the most
I was,
compliant. You
yes,
were a
yeah,
believer
I was
for
a
sure.
believer because as I said earlier too, is like I thought at some point I'm gonna be like these older people in the church, and I'm gonna be a good boy, and I'm gonna have that right heart and stuff. And so the repression of who I was what, for, like I said, from a young age all the way up till almost 40 years old, I never felt like I was fully present, fully aware, fully awake. I was always guarded enough, like even in my um older 20s, 30s, and that I played basketball on Tuesday nights with people from work that were worldlies, and that was a no-no. But it's things like that you don't really make known. And I was pretty much a homebody because I like, I said pop culture, music. We took a television in our home every once in a while. We'd have it in a year. Then I'd feel guilty and gotta, I shouldn't have this in the home. I got kids growing up, so we'd get rid of the TV. And then of course that, you got computers. There's a TV in your pocket, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you're battling this. Like, I want to be this, good Christian boy, but yet all the parts of me that are, most of the guys in the church would be into hunting, fishing, things like that, where I was like I said, pop culture junkie, movies. I mean, I remember getting busted coming out of movies and getting grounded and stuff, and things like that. So parents
Yeah.
would not want their kids to hang around with our friend group because movies, they looked wild. We had, I was back in the day when we had mullets, so I had a big, long mullet, and every Sunday a guy older guy in church would tug my mullet and say, "I'll pay you to cut that off," and I'd be like, "You couldn't pay me enough to cut this thing off." I said, "Yeah." Looking back, he was right, because it was a hideous hairstyle, not because it was a sin. It's like it should have been cut off.
The other question I have is this the better half?
Yes, it is.
I tried
Yeah.
to get him to come to my church as a teen when we were dating, but he would not because that was a sin.
Yes, and
You guys
also,
were taught you're only supposed to be in this one church, right? This
yes,
is
this is the one true saving faith, and her church was way too liberal, way too lenient. And then that's part of my story too, where she ended up getting roped in to the religion as well. When we got serious, we were dating for a few years, or a couple of years, and we were getting more serious. And she was starting to come to church with me, and I'd made it clear to her that I was only going to marry somebody from the church. And this is again in the part of my brain thinking, eventually I'm going to be this good Christian boy. I'm going to be the perfect Listadian boy. And so, if we were going to get married someday, she'd have to be part of the church and stuff like that. But the funny thing is, she she was like, my wife was always a good girl. She was, empathetic. She's awesome. She was just a good girl. And yet me and my friends were a little rambunctious, wild boys, things like that. And yet, like, my dad, remember one time he's pulling me aside and he's like, "You shouldn't be dating this worldly girl." And I'm like, "Well, she's actually a really good girl and I'm pretty wild. And she's actually good for me and makes me a better person." And he took a step back. He's like, "Huh, okay." It's like he hadn't considered that before. Like, I'm out there, and at this point too was when I was even when some of my friends started to drinking and stuff like that, I resisted for a while because, like, that was a big no-go. I was like, alcohol was, they put such a fear of alcohol in you. If you have it in your system and you die, you're going to hell, you know?
right,
And
right.
then, and I remember, like, my dad and I never had a good relationship growing up, and there was always tension in the home. And then in high school, I lived with my grandma and grandpa for quite a while, and I actually lived in an apartment during high school, which is not a good idea either, because you're 16, 17-year-old kid, paying rent in an apartment, going to school, and of course unsupervised. That's not good either. But so you're it's like, she's this good girl. She hated alcohol because she had bad experience with alcohol within her own family. And I said, how ironic is that she meets this good Christian Laestadian boy, that a church that believes alcohol is a sin, and yet she's trying to rein me in because I'm going out with my friends and partying and drinking. I'm like, it's like, the poor thing is like, here I got this good. Well, they call us bunners because there's two different reasons I've heard they called us bunners for the church. Is one is that because the women were always pregnant and had a bun in the oven. The other is because the women always had their hair in a bun on the top, so they're not supposed to have like fancy hairstyles and stuff. So
Interesting.
people would be like, well, she's with this bunner gone bad. He's
Oh my
so
gosh.
so then she was such a good, sweet person that she said she always saw the good in me and knew she could train me eventually to be, who I should be. But growing up in
My
those
wife feels
religions
the
too,
same.
yeah,
Yeah.
and growing up in those religions too, and which I've realized as I was working my way out of the religion, is that there's a lot of I'd say emotional immaturity that's built into, like, those high control religions and cults. And I noticed there's a lot of intellectual immaturity too, which, like I talk about later too, is be part of my story and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
since I felt disconnected, I didn't feel like I was the authentic me, which at the time I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that I wasn't the authentic me. There's always part of my brain nagging at me, which caused me, especially when I got in my 20s and especially my 30s, was depression, just so much depression, because you're trying to, which at the time I didn't know what cognitive dissonance was. That's another thing you don't know, because
Yeah.
I was always a curious person, and I always, like, when it came to playing Trivia Pursuit or things like that, I always did well, and I was curious to know a lot of things in life. But there was certain things I was conditioned when it came to, like, looking into other religious, type of stuff. That's a big no-no. Like, I was afraid of looking into stuff like that, and, like, psychology was a scary thing. So there's certain things that I didn't, like, look into with my curiosity I normally would have, because you're conditioned how you're going to lose your Christianity, for
Yeah.
these things. And you don't look into things, is something I heard a lot from behind the table when they're preaching. And
Yeah.
so they
So
they make you fear information.
Yeah, 100%. And all of the churches I was part of was the same way. Ours teaches the correct truth.
Yeah.
We have the line upon line, precept upon precept. We would say all these things. Um, so just so I have from your childhood, your dad seemed to be a convert to this movement at a young age for you. Your family is being taught all these strange different doctrines. You think it's odd, but this is the world I live in. And so
Mhm.
but you're also kind of a rebel. And finally, eventually, you meet what would be your future wife. How old are
Mhm.
you when you guys meet and you're going through what, middle school, high school, into
Yeah,
college?
I was 16, she was 15. She went to a different school than I, but they were pretty close in the same area, same community or whatever. So, and here we are. Like I said, we're getting more serious. We had actually a really good friend group back then because not only do we have a big crew from our church, but there's also a big crew of like worldly people that hung around with us. So we had a lot of fun and good times and stuff like that. But then at some point, my wife was also friends with some of these other kids from church. So she starts to come to church because we're all just hanging around, and Sunday became almost like a hang around. Like we go to church and then we go hang around and hang out at somebody's apartment or house or whatever, and have fun or go to the
She'd come to
beach and
your
stuff.
church. She would
Yeah,
come
so
to
she
your
started
church.
coming to my church. Yeah.
Okay. What did
And
she
so
think about that first
and that's
experience?
like her first experience was, so here I am. This is normal to me, this forgiveness movement. And I bring her, she comes on a communion Sunday. So she comes with two of her friends. So there she is sitting with her two friends. And me being, this is normal and a dumb teenage boy, I didn't think to explain to her like what's going to happen, what she's about to see. So near the end of this, near the end of the sermon, what happens is the preacher's preaching along and they do it, they drone along. It's like a real monotone preaching because they don't want to be too like high or like it's like real depressing and bring you down and like bring you into the depths of hell and stuff like that. And then when
Mhm.
you get near the end, their inflection in their voice picks up a little bit. And that's when like this is like a trigger to like the forgiveness movement's going to happen. You can feel like a little buzz in the church because you can know that there's going to be this movement and people are going to be weeping and it gets real wet and sweaty. I mean, it's just a lot of tears flowing.
That's how
So anyway,
Just so you know, that's how our church worked, but it was with music usually, and then they would complement it with a preacher, and usually what they'd have is the praise and worship music got you excited.
yeah,
They would start with exciting in our charismatic movement. Exciting, loud, praise, yes, Lord, yes, praise. People getting clapping, getting into it, and then they would switch the song into the next one, which would get really slow and sad and sensitive, and it would cause you to start getting
yeah,
emotional. And then next thing you know, you're crying and you're like, I'm not worthy, but you forgave me anyway. That kind of message, and then sometimes it bounced back to praise, but then usually it would end on this note where the music was subtle. They'd stop the singing. These were live bands in a lot of these
mm,
churches. They were like professionals too. This was
yeah.
not like some three guys just trying to make something happen. And then the pastor would come in. People's eyes are quiet. The music's going in a bit. Now someone in here is struggling today. So no shit,
No,
someone's in
yeah,
here struggling. There's 1,000 people in here.
exactly. How did he
Someone,
prophesize that?
how did he know? But so yours didn't have the music,
No,
or
no
did it?
music, no organs, nothing. No, it just
Wow.
just singing real. The singing is real. They keep that too real quiet and slow and monotone. No musical notes, nothing. You're having the um words, but there's no music notes or anything like that. So anyway, my wife's sitting there. She'd never seen like a man cry before. So the preachers, when they get towards the end and they start asking forgiveness from people, they start crying. And so the preacher's up there crying, talking about his sins and he wants the congregation to forgive him for this, that, and the other thing. My wife's sitting there, his girlfriend at the time and her friends, and like she'd never seen man cry, and he's weeping. She's like, "Well, that's okay. He seems like a nice guy." And this is like every Sunday they do that. To me, it's normal. And then
Yeah.
the movement starts, and people are hugging and weeping, and her and her two friends, she said, we're looking around like, what is happening? Like this is like weird. Well, then someone that woman came up to her and started hugging her and weeping and confessing sins to my wife, and she had no clue what to do. And like I said, we'd say believe your sins forgiven, Jesus holy name, precious blood of reconciliation, believe and be free, stuff like that. my wife's just sitting there hugging, like, It's okay." Like, I have no idea what to say. And, like, I didn't know any of this stuff, and then when she told me later, I'm like, "I'm sorry, I said I'm such an idiot. I didn't even think, like, this isn't normal." But to me, it was normal, so I didn't
Yeah.
consider, like, in other churches, this isn't happening, and I hadn't never had any exposure to other churches besides I went to a Catholic wedding once when I was
Yeah.
a kid, and that was it.
But even
I
that's
was like,
weird. When you come from what you're used to, that's weird.
"Oh, yeah, it is."
My
I was amazed at how long the wedding was and smoke and all that stuff, and yeah.
my charismatic church I was telling you about, my wife was more into Baptisty movements that didn't do the whole speaking in tongues, prophesying, getting really crazy, rolling on the floor kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And we go to this church and we all felt, we need to go down there and get the altar
Mhm.
call. So then they're like, listen, there's these people who are baptized by John the Baptist. Well, there's also the baptism of the Holy Spirit. So they sent us in the back room and they're laying their hands on my wife and me. And of course, I'm a rebel too, like you.
Yeah.
So I'm like recommitting my life, but I already knew to speak in tongues and all that. They're doing gibberish. I'm
Yeah.
like in her face, and they're going, "Get it, you're gonna get it. Keep going." And dude, we're there for hours. Finally, she starts to speak in tongues. I'm so delusional. I think she really gets this gift where she's speaking in tongues. She's like, "Yes, I got it," and everyone's like complimenting her, rewarding her.
Yeah.
Mentally placebo. We leave the church, and as we're in the car, I'm like, "She got the Holy Spirit." Like I'm really thinking it. Later, she's like, "That was the craziest shit I have ever experienced in my life. And I don't want to ever do that again. Don't ever put me through that again. I just did what they wanted me to do to get them to stop.
Yeah.
I was ready to leave." I mean, that's crazy, man.
Yep. And that's probably what my wife should have done, but nope, she got roped in and we got married and then she got stuck in there for the next couple decades.
Okay, so
Yeah.
take us to Ricky's next
Yeah.
step. Where are we going in your life?
And well, the thing is you got you're not expected to date too long, because they're worried about you fornicating and stuff like that. Which I remember my wife saying too. She talked to a preacher one time, and he was asking her if we were fornicating. And this is when she's a teenager. I don't know what she was at the time, 17 maybe or whatever, 16, 17. And she's like, "I don't even know what is that." She'd never heard the word fornicating before. And it's like typical, like that Danielle, the knitting cult lady, she always says that every single cult is a sex cult because they seem to always be obsessed with what people are doing, what's in the
Exactly.
bedroom. And so, yeah, she's asking, "Why are you doing this or that or the other thing?" But we ended up dating a lot longer than most. We're actually, what was it, 4.5 years, maybe something like that. Anyway, 4 years, whatever. But a lot of times people get married within, a short period of time. And it used to be even more common where people before 18 were getting married, but now they're trying to keep people at least to get past 18 before you get married.
Right.
And so here we are dating for quite a while. And see, I must have been, I was probably getting, around 20 years old. And all of a sudden you realize, well, you're expected, like, I probably should be asking her to marry me because that's just what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to get married around that age. And even when it came to like engagements are usually short too because they don't want you getting into trouble before you get married, because you figure, well, you're almost married, so you might get fooling around. And which I didn't really think about at the time either. But then, so my wife, when she planned with her family, when most of the family out of the area could make it, our engagement was like whatever 4.5 months long or something like that, or 4 months long. See, it's March, April, May, no, 5 months long. And then I didn't realize too that people were criticizing her, like, you shouldn't have an engagement that long, and that's not normal and stuff like that.
Interesting.
And so, like I said, with the church stuff, I'm always like I always got 1 foot out, 1 foot in. So a lot of those type of things, I didn't really pay attention to that much, But then when they bring it up, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Think about it. They don't have long engagements. They don't have this or that. And so we got married, and
You're 18.
yeah, well, no, at that time, let's see, I was 20 when I got married. She was
Okay.
19, and then
Gotcha.
within 9 months, we had our first child. So at that point, I was still very immature. I was still wanting to hang around with my single buddies. So like on the weekends, I'd go hang out with them one night and then be at home, the other night and stuff. We hang around a bunch of single guys and you're out there partying or stuff like that. Like I said, I was still very, very emotionally immature.
Yeah.
And
I can relate.
that's why I should have that's why it's a good thing to wait a little longer. At least for a guy, wait till a guy's like 25, because I also that's when my brain. I feel like in late 24 is when my brain woke up and I saw the world totally different than I did previous. In the front of
Yeah.
you're developing or whatever. So I said
Mine
up
was
till then,
27, but yeah,
okay,
I can,
close
I dig
enough.
it.
Yeah, yeah. I forget
Exactly.
25ish is a good sweet spot, but
Right.
and so, it's like you're trying to balance this world of, and also I said, like, with the emotions, like the depression of, I want to be this good person. I want to be ideally what I should be for church and for husband and for father and all this stuff. But then I'm also battling the part of me that's not happy because I'm trying to be something I'm not, which always felt like shame on me. I shouldn't be
Yeah.
thinking this. I shouldn't be feeling this. And so you're always feeling this guilt. Even for it's probably for a good year, I didn't even go to church. I just wouldn't show up or whatever. This is even in high school too, where I just show up randomly, and then people would say like, "Oh, are you not coming to church anymore?" I'm like, "Oh no, I still believe." Like I said, I'm gonna be a good boy someday or whatever. And so here we are, early in our marriage. I got a child, and then a couple years later, I got another one on the way. And like I said, around that late 24 age, I all of a sudden had epiphany one day where I was like, okay, I'm no longer gonna be. I'm gonna grow up. The past is the past. I'm not. I'm only gonna look forward. I can't. Like I said, a lot of my frustrations and stuff too also came from like relationships with a relationship with my father, and the way I mostly adrift as a teenager and stuff like that. I had no real ambition or goals because everything that I would have liked to do, whether it was going on to college or things like that, was all considered sin. And
Mhm.
even all these years later, it's like the thing that certain things that I would have loved to have gone would have been like, was there psychology, biology, things like that. But those are a big scary, no quite often. And then also, like I said, a lot
Wow.
of pop culture stuff like that. I was into the arts, which arts is, that's a big no. Even in high school, I would love to have been in band or played football, or I mean, even when it came to plays and that, I like doing artwork. I would like to build sets or just things like that. But all that's like no go, so you don't even bother to ask, because it's like you're going to be told no, and it's a bad example and stuff like that. So and
Wow.
so all that dogma of pounding into what's a sin, which was it's like you got the women are wearing all dresses. They're supposed to have their hair is supposed to be plain. There's no makeup. Like I said, alcohol bad, movies bad, TV bad. It's like you're not supposed to enjoy anything if you have. They're always worried. They always talk about light-mindedness. Like if you get light-minded, that's when like the devil can come in and get you to do sinful things. So you're
No, what is
conditioned
it?
to
Like minded?
light-mindedness, like
Light.
Light, light-mindedness. If you're getting too jovial, too light-minded, that's when you can,
Huh.
the devil can come in and you can get a little more sinful and get, we talk a little looser and things like that. So you're always trying to, it's always like you're trying to repress yourself,
Yeah.
and so even if you do get a little, joking around a little too much or it gets a little too carried away, people ask forgiveness for like, I shouldn't have been light-minded and, stuff like that. So, like I said, being around, and when you're around those environments, around those people, you're kind of playing that role or being like that, and a lot of things that I heard in my life didn't sit right with me, and those type of things you will see, you observe like a lot of whether it's racism or homophobia or things like that. And a lot of those things I heard in my life always they didn't sit right with me, but yet I always you don't say anything in that group because you and at the time I didn't know about in-group out-group psychology, things like that. All I know
Right.
is I'm not gonna voice a difference of opinion because then you're the if I do, I'm the bad one because
Yeah.
you have a different thought than the rest of the group and stuff like that. So those things always made me feel uncomfortable or awkward. But yet you keep it to yourself. And then years later when I reflect on it, I'm like, okay, I was, without saying something, I was saying something. And like I should have been more bold. But now that I've educated my way out of this and I'm free, you realize that people don't like when you state what your actual opinion is that differs from theirs and stuff like that.
Of
So
course. Of course. Yeah, I mean, again, in your circumstance at the time, it made sense why you weren't trying to put a target on your back or, trying to become the bad guy. Um, so you're in your 20s. You're in your 20s, you have 2 kids, you're just now starting to take life seriously, calming down, No more wild partying in the same way. Not to say you didn't have a few times where you probably drank here and there, but like you're growing up. What happens to Ricky? Where are you at in your religious journey? And what, 24, 25 years of age now?
Yeah, that's what it was. At 24 was the last time I had taken any drink of alcohol. Was that um, day after is when I had this epiphany, and so I didn't have any taste any alcohol again until very little bit when I got into my out of the church and stuff like that. And even then, I don't
Yeah.
really drink or consider myself a drinker, but um, I just figured I'm not, no more alcohol, no more partying. I'm gonna be, what I should be, which was a good thing. I should be more responsible. I should be a better father. I should be. Well, the thing is, since I still wasn't being me with all the things that were part of me, like I said, the music and the sports and the blah blah, all these things, I just then just sunk myself into work. So it was like this new. I felt like I had more control in what I was doing and could basically shrink into myself. So I always had like sideline businesses. I owned a screen printing business for about 5 years. This is I've been a technical writer and illustrator for a manufacturing company for 28 years now. So I've always had this really
Interesting.
good position with a publicly traded company. But then I also had my creative side, which I need to satisfy. So I turned it into like side hustle work stuff. So I own a screen printing business, which I was able to do my creative stuff that satisfied that, and plus we've owned other businesses where we've owned a candle business for the last 8 years, stuff like that. But I poured myself into just working on the side hustle stuff. So I'd be working all the time. That was like my new way to not have to think about life. Is that was like a control. Is I got these things I gotta satisfy in me. So it was just like I just instead of doing things goofing around, hanging out with my single buddies and partying, now I'm just working all the time. And it was like a
And
way
this
to
around
also,
that time, around
yeah,
that age. Okay.
yeah. So it started, from mid 20s all the way up until, recently. I just worked a lot, just pounding myself into work. So it's like then I'm not present again. So it's like my wife's, not seeing me much because I'm always working, whether I was, work all day or else working in my business in the evening. It's like, you're just working all the time.
Yeah.
And then so since I'm doing that all the time and also going through bouts of depression, where I'd feel like I could control myself. So like, okay, knock this off, stop this. You gotta just get a hold of these feelings, emotions, just settle down. You gotta, restrain yourself and be a little more, calm and stuff like that. So then I'd be like, okay, I pull myself with my bootstraps. So you might go a few weeks or a month or two feeling okay, and then I get sucked down in depression again. And this is just back and forth all through 20s, 30s. You're just, fighting that back and forth, which would make
And you're
you,
still a believer. During all this time, you still believe.
yeah, still, I mean, going to church every Sunday, considering myself a believer. Um, like I said, it's always, I thought, when I consider myself a believer, yes, but I wasn't a believer to the level that, like, people weren't asking me to be like a godfather to their children and stuff because I didn't show enough that I was serious enough to, you know, like they could see that I was a little too lackadaisical. I wasn't putting, they would say they're not a works-based religion. They would say it's all about, the heart, the breaking of the heart and the belief in this, that your sins are forgiven. So they say it's not a works-based, but it's very works-based because when they see the way you behave, or if I'm not, I wasn't one that would go up on the altar to ask forgiveness, or and there's some people aren't. I heard people criticize over the years, like, I never noticed so and so going up to the altar,
Mhm.
or I was a little too, like I said, I played basketball with some worldly people, so he's not serious enough. Or I didn't like to go to, every once a month they'd have a gathering at the church, and they'd toss around a few questions, and I'm supposed to have a discussion. I didn't really show up to those because it was so much of an echo chamber where everybody's afraid to answer and say something different, because they really talk about one-mindedness. Everything should be one-minded. We're all
Yeah.
one-minded. So it's like somebody comes up with a halfway decent answer, and then pretty much it's an echo the rest of the way. Well, what so and so said sounded, good, and I don't know if I want to have different thoughts. And then if somebody would have a little bit of a unique thought, I'd hear people days, weeks later, making fun of that person. Like, did you hear what so-and-so said? Like, and I'm thinking, well, that's something actually interesting for once, usually it's just everybody afraid to answer, got the microphone, like, I don't know what they said sounded good,
Oh my
So
God.
I just didn't like that stuff. It's so, as a fundamentalist church well, actually, this is part of the story that I should go back to is the preachers do not go to seminary. They have full-time jobs and they're picked by the congregation to be preachers.
Hmm.
So as a lot of these fundamentalist religions are, since they're not learned and like they don't know context for a lot of things, so they have like the belief, the Listadian belief. And that's another thing I probably should preface before this conversation is I'm telling everything's perspective of the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church sect of Listadianism. There's been many splits over the years. So even when it came to the U.S. in the later 1800s, there's even like history living Christianity books that show the beef people had back then and the splits and stuff like that. So everybody's
Right.
got their little bit of. I also said it usually takes a charismatic man that might be a little smarter than the rest, and he got his own ideas. And next thing you know, it just splits off and splits off. So the reason I'm saying that is because the interviews I've done in the past, people will come in there. I'm a Listadian, and this isn't true, and blah blah blah. And I'm like, this is like they consider themselves the Old Apostolic Lutheran Church would be called the firstborn, which comes out of the Bibles in Hebrews. I think I actually wrote down Hebrews 12:23, Church of the Firstborn, true spiritual congregation established by Christ. So that's what they call themselves. Is we're the firstborn Listadians, the Old Apostolic Lutherans. So like everything I'm saying is from that context because, like I said, you'll get the well actuallys in the comments saying I'm not telling the truth, but it's the Old Apostolic Lutheran, not the other branches.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they would be the strictest of all the sects, though.
Your form
Yeah,
was
when I was in the
okay.
strictest.
Gotcha.
Yeah. There's
Yeah,
other ones
because
that play sports or things like that. So
the Presbyterian church I went to wasn't that everything you listed strict. They did want us to cook our meals on Saturday so that we didn't have to cook on Sundays. They thought that the Sabbath was Sunday, they believed, by the way. So what are you supposed to do on the Sabbath? Rest. You're not supposed to work. And the women wore white veil type covers in the church, the ones that were more devoted. You could tell they would cover their heads. Paul talks about women covering their heads. They took that stuff like literally.
and
They did have a piano though, unlike what you had.
no
We
piano.
did get.
And the women do wear scarves over their heads during the
Okay,
sermon.
so there is.
So before the preacher starts, before sermon or before the church starts, they all put their little huivi thing. They call them huivis or whatever their scarves on.
Yeah.
And, so under the hearing the word of God, they're supposed to have that scarf on.
Wow.
So yeah.
So
they take that.
what happens to you? It seems like you went through like a couple decades of just going through the motions, depressed, maybe struggling with identity because of all the upbringing, the trauma of hell, the not really knowing who you are because they're telling you who you're supposed to be. There's a friction between who you want to be and like all of these issues going on for decades. Are there memories you want to touch on as we're getting to what happened to Ricky that made Ricky find Ricky? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So we had let's see, we would have been probably in our early 30s and we had another child. So we have three kids. We have one, our oldest is a boy, and then we have two girls. And so the kids were always a little bit uncomfortable with the church. I think little things they'd say, you could tell they didn't like being around a lot of kids from church. There's a lot of bullying and stuff that goes on in the church. The preachers are always saying every Sunday too, like, you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, and you're lucky and stuff. So it seemed like once a year they'd have a special gathering because schools would complain about kids from the church bullying and stuff like that. And I mean, kudos to the church for trying to address it with a gathering, but the problem is they don't think they realize, which I didn't know at the time either, is thinking about it, is like you're conditioning these children to believe that they're special, they're God's chosen, they're better than anybody else, even though they would say we're not, we're just humble sinners. As a little kid, it was common on the playgrounds for them to tell other little kids, you're going to hell and stuff, you don't go to the right church and things like that. So my kids didn't like being around them because they never felt comfortable. So then if we'd bring that up, well, they'd say, well, the reason that, you don't bring your kids around enough to the other kids from church. And so that's probably why they're getting picked on or bullied or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's what you're saying there. It's like, okay, like, our kids are bullying you because your kids aren't owning enough. I'm like, well, that's wrong, but they're not going to criticize these other kids because they're from a more stricter family or something. So
Right.
it's like you're saying that it's they won't bully them as much if you come around more. But it's like, why would the kids want to come around if they're getting bullied in the first place? Like, you go in circles there.
Yeah.
It's like, and the times they would bring kids, and if they brought kids that weren't from church but were like neighbor kids and went to a church type function, well, yeah, the other kids would be mean to that kid and stuff. So our kids are seeing that and being like, my kids from my friends from school are so nice and sweet, and like these Christians, these true Christians, the silver spoon in their mouth can be pretty mean. So comes to find out later, my kids said that they had planned on leaving the church when they got old enough anyway. Which,
Yeah.
fast forward to my son, when he graduated from high school, he went to college. And first year, he didn't know what he wanted to do, so he just jumped into marketing. But once he found biology, he absolutely loved biology. He went full bore ahead with biology. And even from a young age, he didn't want to be in the church, which he didn't tell us until later when he left the church. So he actually left the church before the rest of the family did. And with biology, he's hearing things that preachers are saying up there. So, these more young earth who say things like, dinosaur bones aren't real. They're planted by the devil and to confuse man. And here he is, studying biology. And right now he has a master's degree in biology. I know he said at
Wow.
some point he wants to get his PhD or whatever, but so for him, like at 18, he was out, he didn't, which to my wife and I was traumatic. We're thinking, oh no, we weren't strict enough. Here I am living with one foot in the world, one foot in the church. And I wasn't a good example of my kid. He's at home and there's dad in the garage listening to heavy metal music or punk music or whatever. And then, so he had friends that weren't from the church. So, we're thinking, well, a bad example, we should have had him hang out with people from church. And, we feel a lot of guilt because, like, oh no, we're sending our son to hell. And plus he was very intelligent and he got good grades. So I pushed him into college because I'm like, you're not going to waste this brain you have. And like during my adult life, I went to college a few different times, but I never finished with a degree. I just had a few different semesters here and there.
Mhm, mhm.
Like I said, anything I would have been interested in studying was a big no or sin. So of course, when he switched to biology, we're like, oh, scary. And then he's saying a few things that, aren't, as we consider, aren't correct, even though he's got the education and the evidence to back up what he's saying. And, we got the religious, dogmatic preachers that are saying, no, what he's saying is not right. And then, like, years later, you look back, you feel foolish because there's evidence to back up what he said. And theirs is only hand wavy, like, whoa, we don't want to think about that. you know?
Yeah. How old were you when your son
So
is now doing all this? So,
I would have been, it probably would have been around 40, somewhere around
okay.
40 years old. So he's studying that. He's not going to church, which is, we'd be, well, my wife more than me. I didn't say much, but she'd like, kind of encourage him to come to church, and we'd be sitting in church, like hoping he's going to show up, and he wouldn't. And we're just, we're sad about it, because he's going to be lost. And like I said, even though I'm trying to battle or balance two worlds, I'm also, thinking that someday if I had the true breaking of the heart and I repent, I'm going to go to heaven too. And I want my son there and stuff like that. And in the meantime, the girls too is the same, same thing where they're trying to encourage them to hang out with girls from the church and stuff like that. But like my middle daughter would say, well, the girls that have friends from school are actually really nice, but these other girls, they want to get me in trouble, into trouble, and they want to hang out with these boys at this place and smoking and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And of course, we're like, yeah, but when you get older, those girls are gonna be going to heaven, and your worldly friends aren't, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
so,
The same trick that was used on you, you were kind of just recycling. Yeah.
yes, and even though I'd grown up in like I said, a little more of a unique experience because my dad was from the world, so there was things that I gravitated towards sports or things that he liked and stuff like that. I always had that little bit, like I said, a little bit of foot in the world. Well, then our household was much more liberal than the house I grew up in for allowances. They always call me, making allowances for sin or stuff like that. Because my wife, since her family wasn't from the church, the kids had more access to worldly things. Which also is good because you get more empathy for people. Like in my mind, I'm conditioned from a young age to like there's worldlies, and you divide in your mind, you know, saved and unsaved, where our kids were more nuanced in that. And so how is grandpa, the nicest person I know, or great grandma, the nicest person I know, going to hell, but yet I know this person from the church that's, you know, not the nicest person, but yet they were
Yeah.
born with a silver spoon in their mouth, you know. So they had those things that I think helped them to move out of that mindset more so than like myself, who grew up, especially the when I was younger, when I said there was the one really fire and brimstone dogmatic preacher. A lot of that, like there's that 4 to 14 year age where a lot of that psychological damage is done in those type of religions. And I had a heavy dose of that. So it's like, I mean, I guess I always said, even if it was only 5% of my brain, that part was always pounding on me to, you know, be a good boy and repent someday, or, you know, or feel that true breaking of the heart. And I'm like, but dude, I like comic books, and I like, you know, I like music
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So then, you know, like we go back to when my son's going to college, we're worried about that. At the same time, I'm going through what I call more of a heavy dose of depression, where I'm feeling like you're almost feeling like I told my wife the other day, it's very weird. It felt like almost like a nihilistic feeling, but at the same time, you're like a Christian. Like it's there's no point in life because you're told you're here to prepare yourself for heaven. So I almost feel like there's no point in life, period. You know, like
Mm.
what is the whole point of even being here for even a second? You know, so it's like you're almost a nihilist, but not quite, because you do have a purpose. You're gonna go to you're gonna get to heaven. You know, so it's like finally that dragged me to such a deep depression, where I'm like, I finally, after probably feeling like that for a good year or two, I'm like, I got to figure out, why do I feel this way? What is going on here in my brain that's caused me to feel like this? So I started, you know, you started looking into things a little bit, like psychology wise, and you start learning a little things here and there, you know, things I didn't know, like cognitive dissonance, and you just start learning these little bit of things of like, but it's like it's slow. It's like it's death by a thousand cuts. You're learning a little bit here, a little bit there. You're reading books, you're watching videos, you know, YouTube, things like that. But still, you're not. It's not like putting the puzzle pieces together yet. But it's like just 10,000 piece puzzle, but there's little things. And so, you know, going through that psychology stuff, then I came across like this is where the Jordan Peterson comes into it. So
Mhm.
this is during the time when, you know, his gotcha with the that the gotcha thing on free speech with the reporter. That's when that went like viral. It's something about
Okay.
free
Okay.
speech, and that it's not escaping right now. But anyway, so I just saw that video. It obviously came up because I was looking up psychology stuff. Well, then after that, you know, I saw this video, this Jordan Peterson biblical series stuff, which was a big scary, like, go to hit play, like I shouldn't be doing this, you know, because even when my wife, when years ago, told the preacher that, you know, sometimes when I'm feeling a little down, some days I like to, you know, put music, or put, you know, Christian music from the internet going, you know, and he's like, no, no, don't do it. You're not supposed to do that. It's like, that's wrong. It's a sin, you know. So it's like,
That's
not at all.
insane.
So
Yeah.
here, hitting play on this Jordan Peters, because, well, actually a little bit between there. So because of that one viral video from Jordan Peterson with the free speech gotcha thing, I saw his psychological stuff. So wrapped up in all the psychology of, you know, books I was reading, things I was looking at, videos I was watching, things I was reading on the internet, he came into the feed because of his psychology stuff, you know, and his classroom
Right.
stuff and all that. And that's when like the biblical series came into my feed. And I'm like, well, it was interesting listening to him along with all the other people I listen to. Like I like Michael Shermer's books are great, you know, Believing Brain and Why People
Yeah.
Believe Weird Things. I liked Steven Pinker, like, you know, his books, and like Blank Slate, stuff like that. So then, you know, Jordan fell in there, and even though like at the time I was probably a little more, at the same time that I was like coming out of this religion, I was also pulling myself out of more of like a right wing mindset too. This is all, you know,
Right.
as a fundamentalist, you're all tied into that stuff. So I hit play on this biblical series, and I'm hearing about learning about allegory and stuff like that for the first time, and Echo with Gilgamesh. And luckily my brain was like willing to accept that stuff, because the first time I'm hearing about this allegory and epic or something like that, like my mind is going
Yeah.
because everything that when I was younger and I looked at like the Old Testament and stuff like that, I couldn't. I mean, even from a young age, when I hear the stories of Noah's Ark or things like that, and even like when I got in my teens or in my 20s, when I'd open the Old Testament, I'd read these stories, and you got talking donkey or this flood or all these other things. I wouldn't read very long, and I'd close that book, and I'd be like, "This is like bullshit," you know, and I'd be like, "Oh, shame on me! Like I shouldn't be thinking this." But I'm like, "This can't. This seems like a child story, This seems like make believe. Like my mind couldn't get there. Like this can't be literal." But that
Yeah.
freaked me out. I'm not looking at the Old Testament for a long time, and it might be a couple years before I bust it open again and look at it. And so when I'm hearing about this allegory and you're thinking about these things from that are related to things that are in the Bible, and that's when you really start getting a little bit deeper. And it was probably I got into that biblical series, and around that same time is when one of your videos came up with Robert Price,
Yeah.
just on the sidebar. I'm like, oh, cool, I gotta check that out. Looks like a nice old man there with this other good-looking young man. Press play. I can't remember what the title was. So I watched that, and then it said about you were doing a live, and I'd never really been in any lives before. And this must have been a day or two or a couple days later. You were doing another one with him live. This is when you were in North Carolina.
Yes.
So I'm like, oh, cool. I'm gonna go on there, watch live. And so you and Robert having this interesting conversation, and I was like, this is awesome. Like this guy's, he got so much knowledge, and like I'm not used to this. Like if he sat down in like my church, they'd be, had a discussion with my preachers. They wouldn't be able to keep up. Their minds would be spinning.
He's an encyclopedia.
Yeah, an encyclopedia. Yeah. And so I happened to pop in and put a comment in. I just put it. It was probably the first super chat I ever put on a video. And I can't remember what I commented on, but I mentioned something about Listadianism, just out of curiosity.
I remember that super chat.
You were struggling to pronounce it, which I don't blame you. Listadianism.
I struggle to pronounce a lot of things.
No, but that Listadianism is it's one
this
of the
was
ones
like 7, 8 years ago, 7 years ago.
Like that.
Yeah.
And I had forgotten that Robert actually wrote a book with an ex-Listadian called Ed Sumanen, who actually had written quite a big book called The Examination of the Pearl, which was a breakdown of not only the Listadian and the different sects, but then also his take on the Bible and things he found that were problematic. And, he was a true believing in a different version of Listadianism. He was in the LLC, which is like Laestadian Lutheran Church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, him and Robert had written a book together, Exiting Eden. I think that's what it was called.
Yes.
Which I had forgotten about. So when I brought up something about Listadianism, Robert's like, I know that religion, and he starts, riffing on it, kind of making fun of it and how dogmatic it was and stuff like that. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. He wrote that book with him, and I thought that was so interesting, But then after that, it was like I got hooked on your channel, and I found out, Niels is Gnostic informant and all, and so it became like a regular thing where I was just, watching all these videos, as well as, like I said, the biblical series, stuff like that. And as you're learning more and more about, you go way back to, like, the first known story, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or, I learned a lot from Dennis MacDonald too. You get that mimetic stuff where it's like a lot of these things are lining up from these much older, thousands of years older stories than what's in, the New Testament or Old Testament, stuff like that, or the Greek influence on the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you learn all these things in your mind, just like, this is just amazing. So between the psychology of, okay, cognitive dissonance explains why I was so miserable. I'm trying to be something I'm not. My mind's battling itself. But I'm also learning about a lot of the stuff that the church thinks is literal is not literal. There's stories in there, like, like think of Noah's Ark, like I was thinking like death and rebirth, those type of things,
Right.
But it's like
more symbolic and
more symbolic. It's not a literal thing, but which I find in a lot of cults and high control religions, it's like they're always, a lot of those things are, well, they're literal to a certain extent, but then there's certain things like, what is it in like Ecclesiastes, I think it's 9:7 or something, where it says like, enjoy life's simple pleasures, eat bread, drink wine with a joyful heart. Well, then in those type of cultish dogmatic religions, well, no, that's not really wine, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Alcohol bad. So no, that's not wine. They don't literally mean wine. I'm like, okay, this is literal. Like this boat, had all these animals on there. How did the kangaroos get to Australia? How did the, penguins get down, all this other stuff. But yet when you come to that, okay, that's not literal. It's not wine because alcohol bad, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe it doesn't mean wine. Dancing too. They'll say, well, no, dancing in the Bible does not mean dancing. What they mean is it's like the joy in your heart. That's the dancing, not little
Oh my
dancing, because a dancing
gosh.
sin. So, and which is I've been saying for years is like in a lot of people's is like there's so many things that are open for interpretation in the Bible and so many vague things that it's no wonder there's like 43,000 different versions of Christianity, because any dude that comes along with a new idea, you can find plenty in there to do mental gymnastics to say this matches this matches this. Well, no, that's not literal. So, as I'm learning all these things about Homeric epics, this is all these pieces are coming to place, and it's like you just have all these different things coming to place. And I remember one day I was sitting at work, and it was like all that psychology, all that stuff I had learned from the different scholars that you've had on, like and from the biblical series and all that stuff, it all just came crashing together one day. And at work I had a stand-up desk, one that I can raise and lower when I'm working, because I'm drawing, I'm writing manuals, or else I'm drawing machine parts all day. And I got this thing standing up, and it was like everything crashed together at once. And I remember that feeling of like I kind of rocked back on my heels, and I was like, whoa. And I was like, this weight, it felt like this 1,000-pound weight just threw off my shoulders. And I'm like, everything I've been trying to be is based on some dude's idea of the truth.
Yep.
And it's not real. And I have evidence to prove that, you can prove this stuff out. It's not like you're just get hand wavy and I like this and I like that or whatever. It's like you can prove these things out. And I'm like, okay, now what do I do?
Mm.
Like, I know something I didn't know before. Everything's clear to me now. So it's like, what am I going to do from this point forward? Like, my life has changed. I got a wife at home that is a believer in the church, but how much is she a believer? Like, I can't bring this up to anybody. If I bring this up to anybody, like, I'm going to get dragged to preachers. I'm going to get rebuked. I'm going to be, so it's like, what do I do at this point? And the rest of the day I'm working there, and I'm just, your mind's just going like, oh, like this is a new life in the world. Like, who am I? Like, and even then, fast forward to now, only in the past year. So this would be 2018 when it all crashed together. So this past year is the first like full year now where I feel like I am exactly who I'm supposed to be, who I feel like I should be. Like everything is aligned this past year. So even when I left that, educate my way out of that, and then I'll share you the journey of like how everything went with my wife and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But even then, even if you're 90%, your brain's clear now. I know all this stuff. I've examined all this stuff. You're still having like all this stuff that you have to process through to create your new you. So there's still a lot of work to be done. So even after getting that, it's like you still have all this. I had all this work to do for years before I finally feel like I am who I'm supposed to be, and so we'll go back to that time again. But it's just
Okay.
amazing like how long it can take to actually get to a spot where you feel good and you've kicked out all this. I don't know if I'd call it. I wouldn't really call it for myself like religious trauma, but it's like I don't know how I describe it really. It's kind of like you got all this stuff that you have to deal with, and all these old thoughts that you have to work through, and you carry a lot of like not I wouldn't even say embarrassment, because you only know what you know at the time that you know it, and it's like sometimes I might feel a little cringe, like, "Oh, I can't believe I thought that or believed that," or like, oh, I feel ashamed that I separated people in my mind. And I think it was
Mhm.
years ago too. I think that I don't, maybe I read it somewhere about Robert Price when he the walls of like fundamentalists broke in his mind. I think he said he was like in a university cafeteria or something, and he's no longer saw people as saved and unsaved. He saw them just as people. And I had that kind of moment where I looked around for the next few weeks at people I knew, worldly people that I would have called worldly before, who are now just people just like me. And I felt a little guilt that I divided them in my mind, even though I still wasn't like the type of Christian or Listadian I thought I should be. I still divided them as saved and unsaved, you know? Like I've got this silver spoon, and like I'm still gonna get to heaven at some point when I become the proper Christian. And I felt a lot of guilt about looking at people like that. And having those clear eyes for the first time, it was weeks of looking at people just in my mind, just amazed, like I see them as a person, and my empathy grew. I try to describe it as like the Grinch and the Grinch Stole Christmas when his heart grew. I feel like when I
Mhm.
left fundamentalism and left that cult, my heart just grew and my empathy just exploded. And it's gotten more, I've gotten more and more empathic over the years, which I also felt too, like I had to almost relearn and train myself on how to, certain situations when a bias kicks in from an old thought pattern, I'd be like, okay, where did that come from? You know, I'd reflect on it. Why did I get that feeling, and where did that come from? And then I worked my way through it, because when you get conditioned to those things, your biases. I mean, it's hard to get that out of your system, because
Yeah.
it seems real and true at the time, and then you find out it's not real and true. These
Yeah,
people
because
aren't.
once that disillusionment disappears, and now you know to question things you weren't doing before, habits you didn't have about questioning these beliefs and ideas, you know, there's patterns, behaviors are going to echo over the years. Ideas are going to continue to echo. You got to retrain and teach, like you said. I mean, they talk about this as you've read The Believing Brain by Michael Shermer and other things, but there's other people that I've had on, like John Waithe, about the phantom arm experiment, where people who've lost an arm, or they've had to have an arm amputated or lost it somehow, years later, you go to throw a football at them, they reach with the non-existent arm, still
Mhm.
believing it's there. It's like the wiring is still there, and that takes time. And I think that patience with oneself is very important to understanding and going, listen, I have things I have to change. Always try to get better over time. And I always ask people who are on the other side, understand that not everyone who is still within the bubbles thinks the same way. It takes some time. Your story is really, really, it's interesting to see what's happened. It's taken you a long, long time to get there, but you're finally there, and you're learning and getting out of that bubble. Um, and it's really interesting. I'm honored to be part of that journey, and what I've provided for having a channel that's doing these things and playing a significant role in your life.
Yeah, it's been. I mean, I said I've loved your channel, especially like scholars you got on there, and Bart Ehrman too. He's a big part of my deconstruction and my education. Now, his books, Heaven and Hell, Armageddon, kept all these. I mean, his whole library of books that he's written. I've loved all of them. They've been such a good resource. So
Hmm.
you find all these things, like I mentioned, Dennis McDonald and all these scholars that you have on, Lane Pagels, everything. You learn a little bit from every single one of them. And like I'm not at the level of like you and Neil or Jacob or especially not like the PhD people and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
you learn enough nuggets over time where it's like you get all, like I said, all these pieces of the puzzle. And the thing I feel bad about is like even people that do leave like the Lestadian religions and stuff like that. I've been active in the communities of ex-Lestadians and different um social media groups, Facebook groups, things like that. The thing I always feel bad about is some people, there's levels to where people want to go when they leave that type. Some still want to hold on to their beliefs. So they might remain Christians. They'll keep this, and actually this is a good thing to talk about too, is like the church would always say, we have a simple Christianity. They always say that, every Sunday just about, we have a simple Christianity. But the Christians that I've seen that have left Lestadianism, theirs is much, much more simple, where it's like, Jesus, for them, Jesus paid the price for them. So they should want to live like a good life because of that. And the church would say, like, we're not a works based one. but there's so much involved, and I got to do my hair this way. I got to wear my clothes this way. I got to, just all these different things. But they'll say there's no rules, but we all know that how in-group, out-group psychology works. Those rules, they might not be written in stone, but those are rules. Try to come to that church with spiked purple hair and nose piercings, all that. See how many people invite you over for a coffee that evening. It will be zero. There's rules, So I feel bad for people that, some people, like, if they learn enough to get out of that type of high control religion or cult. But like myself, once the door opened a little bit, I went all the way. Like, I'm just figuring these ideas came from somewhere. Like I said, once I realized this dude in northern Sweden in the mid 1800s had an idea. I'm not going to discount his feelings or whatever. He may have felt something, but that doesn't make it true. It just could be his, a feeling that he had. Who knows what was going on there in his life or his mind or whatever. But it's like, he had an idea. He came up with this, or saw this, the proper way Christianity is supposed to be and stuff like that. But it's like, I can no longer be afraid of like these men have no control over me or my life at all. I can figure out where do these ideas come from, and try to trace them back as far as you can. Like, that's why it's nice to learn from scholars and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So you can figure out like where these ideas came from. So it's not just a hand wavy thing you get at church, where a lot of times if you ask a question it's a little more difficult to preachers, they'll say just believe. You just need to believe. And a lot of times what we heard too is believe first and the understanding will come later. So what they're saying, you don't question preachers. What these preachers are saying, it's coming from the elders in Lapland, which I didn't explain either. Is like, our elders for the church are in Sweden. So all the preachers that are in the United States, between the United States and Canada, there's like 33 churches, and then there's many over in Norway, Sweden, Finland, stuff like that. So, but they go to the elders in Sweden, but what the elders say is that's what you have to believe, or that's what you have to go by. That's coming from God. Their advice is coming from God. So like for myself, it's like I always felt like I could control my own life enough, especially like I said, when I grew up or whatever, and realized I'm just a man and I need to take care of myself. I always felt like I can make the best decisions for myself and my family and stuff like that. Like, I didn't need to go to them for advice. And so it's like, now I'm gonna figure out how far, how much these things kind of line up with what's history and with the Bible and all this other stuff. But then there's certain people that leave that and they go far enough to say, okay, this Listadianism isn't true, but then they'll still might be a little dogmatic in other ways, or still, go into a different church that's like maybe Old Apostolic Lutheran Church light, or stuff like that. But like, I was so happy that when I gained enough knowledge from all the pieces coming, that I was just like, I'm going to be free to examine everything. I'm never going to be afraid to confront a bias. I'm going to read things that make me uncomfortable and reflect on why does this make me uncomfortable. And some of those things, when you read them, you realize I'm uncomfortable, and then you learn enough. You're like, well, actually, no, I was wrong about what I believed before. I've learned something new, right, and I can pivot with that. Where before I was very much black and white in my thinking, which also was difficult. I remember years ago, I was so much, this way, there's right and wrong. There's this way and that way. Everything's black and white. And my wife would tell me, no, there's some gray areas and things. And I'd be like, no, there's not. Black and white, this way or that way,
Right.
And I told her, I said, boy, were you right? And I feel foolish that there's so much gray.
You made me, let's bring the queen back into this, because you figured out something. Okay. Yeah. And it popped your brain, while you're at work and you got your desk, and you said, let's get back to talking about what you had to bring this to your wife. I mean, she's a believer, and you are hearing things clearly she has not heard yet. At least it seems. I mean, I don't know. So what happens when you approach her and you are having this how did you have this conversation, and how did it end up unraveling?
Well, after I had that, realization of, I can no longer go to this church. I got to figure out, how do I handle this properly to not only talk to her about it, but how am I going to handle getting out of the church, things like that. There's so much that comes with that. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna I'm going to take as long as it takes for me to feel like there's an opening to talk to her about it. And I didn't know if that was going to be days, weeks, months, or years. But I'm going to wait for that, what I feel like is the right opportunity. So I probably went to church for a good maybe 5 or 6 months without her knowing what I was thinking or feeling. And I didn't mind it sitting there in church because I found it, since I learned enough about psychology and stuff like that, I found it fascinating to like see like how a high control religion works and a cult works. While I'm sitting there, knowing this is in a cult, and I'm observing like what the preacher says and the reactions of people. So I'm actually was enjoying it. I was actually like chill and kick back. Like, and before I'd been in church, I'd be more like hunch over intense. I was actually like kind of casual, just watching and like this is so interesting. Like I almost wish I had a notebook here and I could write all this stuff down, And the preachers a lot of times will say like, we know, and they'll say something and the congregation nods their head, because they're one-minded. They know this, and the preacher's affirming that we all know this, because whatever he says, God, the Spirit is working through the preacher. They don't prepare their sermons at all. They go up there and speak without any preparation. And then they'll also randomly pick a passage of Bible, but they use the same maybe 15 passages over and over and over. Like my whole life, I feel like I could go up there and give a sermon because I've heard it's like rehashing. They'll just say we're pounding on the same nail. But like when they'd say, let's see what God reveals for us, and they'd pull a part of the Bible and they'd say what they're going to speak on. Most of the time I'd be like, here we go again. Like I know exactly what he's going to say. It's just going to be repetition. Yeah. So like I said, for months I'm going, just chilling out, just listening, planning my week in my head, what I'm going to do, stuff like that. And I could tell that there was things that they were saying that were more and more my wife was bringing up or questioning, or like saying, that seems like a bridge too far, Like when every 4 years, the elders from Sweden come here and have like a tour of the US and Canada where they preach at each of the locations. And one of the last times that they were here, when we were in the church still, they were preaching against like open-toed shoes. Women shouldn't be wearing open-toed shoes. You just get so, I was thinking of the problems in the world and we're worried about this. Or women shouldn't be wearing heels that are high enough for a mouse to get under. And, a mouse can squish down, and then like a couple of weeks later, my wife went to church and she had open-toed shoes on, and she said she walked in and there was a group of little children standing there, and they pointed at her and they're like, disobedience, and pointing at her feet. Very cult-like, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it's like something of a horror movie or something. But anyway, so and then laser tag.
God.
They were preaching against laser tag. We're in a smaller community. There's not a lot of stuff for kids to do, and a lot of times it's just hanging around, them kids hanging around a bunch of cars in a parking lot and smoking cigarettes or whatever, And so during the winters here, we'd go walk at the mall, and the mall has a laser tag thing in there, and there a lot of times there'd be kids from the church in there, and preacher preach. There's always finding things to preach about. Well, he's preaching against them playing laser tag, and so I hear, but next week we're walking around, none of the kids from church are there, and she always wore open-toed shoes. I hear the owner of the business asked this one girl, this disobedient girl, because she's the only kid from church there to play laser tag. And he's like, where have all your friends been the last few weeks? And I'm thinking, he has no idea. They just preached against laser tag. It's like you're always going to, when you're in those type of high control religions, you're always going to be finding things that are a sin and to be repressing people. Because they always say the devil's going to take you by a pinky, and then by the hand, and then by the arm. So it's like, next thing, you're playing laser tag. Next thing you know, you're snorting coke off of a, whatever. I mean, it's just like this. It's like all these little things that are they just start to add up. And my wife and I went for a walk one evening, and she brought up about the laser tag and a couple other things, and I'm like, her mind's working here, and I'm like, this is an opening. I'm just gonna take it.
Take it.
I just like,
she loves you. You love her. Yeah.
Yeah. And I wasn't pretty subtle. I'm just kind of I kind of just stammered my words, and I'm like, you know what? I don't want to go to church anymore. And she just stopped walking. She looked and she goes, huh? It's like her mind was like,
you,
it's like,
you took it there, bro. It's like, hold on,
like
hold on.
nothing subtle.
Yeah,
Nothing
like,
subtle in there. Just
gosh.
dive right in. And it's
Oh,
almost like you could see on her face like that gear's just moving, like
yeah,
her world is just changed. And what does this
yeah.
bring, you know? And I think a couple times too, the next few steps is just like,
Did she ask? Do you remember that conversation? Do you remember like what followed that? I mean, you know not to just go all the way in, but like,
no, that's exactly. I can't down. You want to download everything, but you can't. So it was kind of, I can't, even at that point, I would have called myself, like everyone think she asked one time, you know, do you still believe in God or that type of stuff? I think at that time I
yeah,
said like 10% of me, 5% of me does. Like I left that door open because at that point I knew enough to live. I'm living an evidence-based life. So whatever evidence is presented to me that is compelling, I will pivot and accept that evidence. I'm not
yeah,
gonna retreat from it. I'm which I've noticed, you know, people will do too. Even people that might work their way out of this religion, let's say, even if it's politically, you can get into cultish and politically, you can see
mhm,
where if you bring up like something like, well, this is a political cult or this, you know, behaves this way like a cult. People are like, no, no, like don't go there. Like I'll accept the part
yeah,
about the religion, but I don't want to talk about the, you know, the
of
cult of
course,
politics or something like that. And or like I said myself, I'm open to anything and everything. Like I don't care what it is. I'm not afraid of a conversation. And so like the old me, if somebody would bring up stuff like that, I'd be defensive, agitated, you know, dig your heels in. I didn't know about like backfire effect, all these other things, you know. Once you educate your way out of this stuff and you learn enough about psychology, it's like I just free to absorb anything and everything.
yeah,
So like on that walk, then it's like, okay, suddenly start telling her about things that I find problematic that she's still, you know, she's kind of on the same page with too, things are getting a little too intense, you know, for finding, I mean, there's always been weird sins, like even way back, you hear before there was time they couldn't have bicycles or you weren't supposed to have like curtains on the windows. You know, there's always all through the years, you know, 1800s all the way on, there's always something weird, you know. And it's like it seems like sometimes when these cults start to grow a little bit bigger, it's almost like they try to find more things to. Okay, 20%. Well, that's probably
and she said,
bullshit. I didn't think I
so
want to scare you. I was probably thinking 5 or 10, but I probably told you 20 so you wouldn't be too scared.
yeah. And first question I asked was, but you believe in God, right? Like
That's
she
right. Yes.
immediately could
Yeah.
tell
Yeah.
that something wasn't right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And legitimately at that point, I
I'm so
I
thankful
could
she's in the chat, by the
yeah.
way. I'm
Yeah.
so thankful.
Yeah. And at that point, I wouldn't have considered myself agnostic or an atheist or anything like that. I still
Of
consider
course.
myself a Christian, but like I said, a couple percent Christian. Like I'm leaving this door open to see. I'm going to try out other churches. I feel like if we end up leaving this church at some point, because I didn't at that point, I didn't know she might be a true believer. And what if she's like a real true believer where like she's going to want me to go to the preachers constantly, or I'm going
Like she's
to,
not going to relinquish this or be
yeah,
willing to follow the path of maybe considering it not being true,
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. And it would put a lot of tension in her marriage, which I'm sure right
Yeah.
away she's worried about her marriage. Like, what if
Well,
this
I
causes us
think
to
it's
split?
I think this is important to point out because the viewer who's in that theology, they have this weird internal mythology. They tell themselves that you're not a true believer unless you stay. The only way to prove you're a true believer by many of their standards, you have to die believing. That's it.
Hmm.
There's no other explanation. You just got to die in the faith. And then they're like, oh, that was a true believer, meaning you can never not be out of the faith. And they really considered you a true believer. Some might say you could lose your salvation, but I think it's important to just point out like she could still be a true believer and yet have problems, have questions, and yet you were worried she was the kind of believer maybe that would not have been cooperative, but would have been like, I gotta go, you know, get elders involved. My husband's losing his faith. We've got to fix this problem. We got to get him saved. We got to get him right. And that seems to be what your mind thought. if I'm correct.
Yeah. It could be. I mean, it could be real scary. It could, like I said, once you make that statement, you're changing your whole life. Your whole world is going to change when you say
Mhm.
that I don't want to go to that church anymore. And when it comes to doubts too, like the preachers a lot of times would say like they'd ask forgiveness when they're asking forgiveness at the end of their sermon. They're also asking like, "Forgive me for my doubts." And I remember one time my wife asked the preacher, she's like, or said to him like, "I'm so glad that you mentioned doubts. That." You know, it's nice to hear that you have doubts sometimes too, because I have doubts or that. And he corrects her. He's like, no, I don't mean like I don't not doubts about the faith. He said, I should never doubt that I am worthy of heaven. I said, oh, okay, like a different understanding.
Oh
She was
my
thinking like, oh, good, this is an opening to talk about doubts about the church. No, there's no doubts about that
And
theology
he's at
there.
home talking later to his wife, probably going,
Yeah, she's got
well,
doubts.
she's got issues,
Yeah.
something's wrong. Yeah.
So it's like, no, I got to believe that I am worthy of heaven or whatever. So then it's like, then my wife's obviously got a lot of things to think about, because it's like, okay, he doesn't believe. He still says he's a Christian, but like, what do we do now? And like I said, if I'm bringing this up, thinking like, what if she really like? I have no idea like how much she believes, because she she had more of a friend group in church. She was able to acclimate better with people at church. I always kept everybody at a distance. I was
Yeah.
very much a loner in that, because I wanted to do what I liked or enjoyed, and I didn't. If you let too many people in and they're aware of your sins, it brings in a whole bunch of headaches of they're going to be rebuking you. They're going to, talk to people about you. They're going to want to bring you to the preachers because you're doing X, Y, and Z or whatever. That's not. So it's like, well, I'd rather just be a loner and just do my own thing and kind of float around. My wife was more of the social butterfly, where if she would get an invite to go to somewhere for visiting, because a lot of times people from church will go visit each other on Sunday night. She's like, oh, tonight so and so invited us over, and I'd be like, oh, okay. But I always hated going, because I always felt like, and this is another thing too, going back from a young age all the way till I left, is that I always felt like the conversations or anything whether it was before church gatherings, visiting at people's homes, I always felt like the conversations were a little sophomoric. They were just very uninteresting and boring. And it was mostly about either other church people. There's always a church gossip line,
Of
There's
course.
also the comments people made, the judgmental comments, especially about people that were outside the church. When they talk about somebody else, they'd be like, so and so is so nice, and yeah, I go to him, or he's my doctor or whatever, and it's so nice. It's just too bad they're not saved. So it's always like judging people. It's too bad they're not saved. It's too bad they're not saved, and things like that ate away at me. Or when I hear things that were just, it just made me feel uncomfortable. And so many times I'd go home, I'd actually physically have like a stomach ache, and at that time too, I didn't realize like this is because this isn't me, and I'm trying in this in group. This is normal conversation and stuff like that. Like this is acceptable in that, and yet I can't say anything in these, or if you did say something a little bit like try to direct them, like, oh well, I always like this person or whatever. They say, yeah, I know, but, and then you go back to that kind of judgmental stuff. And so I hated going visiting, because I also felt sick when I got home, because I didn't like the way they talked about people and stuff like that, or the judgment and stuff. But then on the other hand, I'm also thinking, that is true. It's too bad they're not saved. So it's like, it's a total mind screw.
Yeah. You were so
And
confused in your.
yeah, just always fighting, battling that. So then at some point, my wife is like, so we went every single night, we'd go for a walk. After I dropped that bomb on her, every night we'd go for a walk, and sometimes they'd be
Good.
long, 1 hour, 2 hours, whatever. And we talk, and this went on for months and months and months. We're talking because our daughter is also at that point is less than a year away from confirmation. So
Mm.
we're like, at this point, after talking for months, my wife is getting to the point where she also isn't comfortable, and she may want to leave, because she has so many things that she felt uncomfortable with, but she didn't want to bring up to me either. So here we are, able to be open and honest with each other about this. And we've always spent all our time together. We good relationship as being able to hang out with each other, laugh, joke around, do the same kind of interests, same kind of sense of humor, all that stuff. But this religion thing was one of those things where it's like, that's the scary elephant room you don't really want to
Well,
broach, because it can cause so much strife in your life.
so you came across, I mean, I'm roughly guessing 8 years ago, my channel. Jordan
Yeah.
Peterson's probably a little earlier than that, roughly
Yeah, this
getting
wasn't much. So it was only a few months before yours, maybe 2 months,
okay.
something like
So
that.
this is after you and her are having these walks after
Hmm.
this,
Yeah.
and you're
And my
talking,
mind's
she's
clear.
talking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're still listening at work to more content from Myth Vision,
And
from
yep, growing even more.
all,
And
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. What happens? I mean, like you're slowly working with your wife on this. She's working with you, I'm sure. There's a lot going on there where you both together have to make big decisions.
Yeah.
Is there a moment? Do you remember some serious moments where that line starts to like she starts to go, yeah, I can't go here anymore at all? Like, I mean, what happens?
Not. I mean, I think her biggest fear, because you're trying to figure out, since you're taught that, okay, I think, and you've heard this and experienced a lot, is like, okay, if he's no longer believes in this religion, which is, supposedly the one true saving faith, the one true Christianity. Okay, like you said, are you a Christian still? And I gave her, I still, part of me is. Well, then it's like any type where people are like that, you're like, okay, what are morals and ethics and stuff like that? It's kind of
Yeah.
like the same thing as when you're questioning, like what is an atheist? How can an atheist, be a good person? Like Christian might say, well, if you're an atheist, why don't you can do anything you want, and you could. And I remember a relative saying that, well, and if atheists, they can murder, kill, this, that, the other thing. And I'm thinking, boy, I hope she never is not a Christian, because she got some dark thoughts. But
Yeah.
anyway, so it's like my wife's asking me questions, to try and figure me out, engage me. We're like, where are you at? Like, is marriage still important to you? Like, man and, woman married for life? Because in the church, there's very little divorce, and,
Yeah.
and you're pretty much, when you marry, you're with that person, unless it comes to extreme case of like abuse or stuff like that. But so she's like, thinking, is marriage is important to you now? Is it, all those type of things. So trying to feel me out, and I'm giving her like what I think, but I can't go all the way to say like, do you know about allegory? Do you know this? Do you know that? I can't dump all that stuff on there. So it was just slowly, like I said, over that many, many months of these long conversations, walking, where I could, each conversation, I drop in a little more and a little more. And I thought, she's hearing this stuff in the same way that I was learning it. But then also I know she's picking up different books, reading different things. She's watching videos. So she's starting to grow too.
Mm.
So after many months of this, it gets to the point where, okay, she's thinking, I don't really feel comfortable in this church, but like, what do we do now? Because, our youngest is confirmation coming up. Do we, again, too, like, I don't know how much of a believer the youngest one is. Like, am I ripping something away from her that she wants?
Right.
And so we figure, well, okay, we'll just, we'll have her go to confirmation. And then when her confirmation is over, it goes on for like a week and a half. When that's over, that's the last Sunday I'm ever going to church again. Like, I'm thinking, I'm going to have to go there for a few more months until her confirmation comes up. I'm going to try to treat it like I did like I did before, just chill out, hang out, and let her go through that confirmation process and let her decide for herself, does this religion work for her or not? So she went to confirmation. The first day I pick her up, she gets in the car and starts griping about all these things that the preacher said. And she's way too smart for her own good in this case for the church preachers, because there's things they said that was problematic that she did not agree with, and she was free to share with me. And I didn't tell her at the time that I'm leaving the church, after your confirmation's over. But I was just like, I'm kind of agreeing with her and stuff. And inside my mind, I'm just like, oh, this is wonderful, because when I do leave, and then later if my wife leaves, my youngest daughter is ready to go anyway. She couldn't, she wanted to go to college. One of these things the preacher tell her, you should want to be a wife and have children. She's like, I want to go to college, And then, where do you want to live when you're older? And she's like, California. Like, that's a no go. There's none of our churches in California. So, all these things are just, so I thought, okay, this is going to be easier transition with her, because she's already out mentally.
Yeah.
Well, then of course, after the next Sunday, when I told her it's the last Sunday I'm going and anymore, she's like, I thought something was up, because you didn't seem really that worried about what was going on in confirmation. So I remember my confirmation. I didn't want to go. I left my house. I walked all into my cousin's house, which was probably an hour walk away. Just when I got there, my dad pulled up and was like, "You're going to confirmation tomorrow," because I didn't want to go either back then.
Yeah.
So I said, I know what it was like. I was miserable in there. I said, I just had fun, and after confirmation over, and we go hang out at the beach and jam the music and stuff. But sitting in class all day was torture. So yeah, so then after that, it's like, okay, I'm not going anymore. Well, then of course my wife's still in there, and my wife's still going with my daughter at the time. They went for several, probably I can't remember, it was three more months after I left, probably about 3 months. But she's getting love bombed like crazy then because of this. Her heathen evil husband has left the church and made a bold statement. He left right after the last confirmation that his youngest child went through, and it was odd conversations too, because people were asking my wife, like, do you still love him? And people telling her too, like, I couldn't stay with my husband if he left the church and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my daughters were seeing this because both daughters were still going at that time. And that made them very angry and uncomfortable. Like, these people are trying to come between my mom and dad, and they know how much we love each other and stuff. And like, this is offensive to them, and they don't want to go there anymore either. And so it was like, my wife, instead of preacher, came up to her and was like, do you love your husband still? Stuff like that. And she's just like taken aback. Like, why would she was, I love him more than ever. He's lost all of his social, all his friends, everything. He's lost everybody. It's like he needs me more than ever because I'm too dangerous. Once I left the church, I'm too dangerous to talk, especially because I was open about why I left, and especially since I was on social media sharing why I left and stuff like that. And so then it's like a few months later, my wife then stopped going. And when I first left, I had half a dozen or so people come to talk to me to try and save me. But at that point, I had so much knowledge about the different things, like I said, related to church history, allegory, the way the church was created. Is like I would ask them questions because I learned that if you just ask questions of people that come to you like that, they're gonna have to think about those things, and it's gonna stress them out, and then they're just probably gonna leave and leave you alone. So I'd ask them questions, and they'd be like, you could see that the cognitive dissonance that at that time I knew what it was, but they're in the church and they didn't know, so they've been like me in the past. And so at some point they'd kind of like get frustrated and be like, oh, and then. Or they might even admit too, like, I don't really know that, or I never heard of that, or I didn't know that, or I've never heard of this thing, or I should probably learn more. And I say, well, yeah, you probably should, But then they leave and give me that look like, it's too bad he's going to hell. And I'm like, do you realize you just couldn't answer any of the questions I asked you? You didn't know any of this history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still don't get it because to them it's simple. I should be just wallowing in my sin and then want to purge this sin and have a clean heart. But even then, you get that clean heart, it's not going to last very long because within a couple seconds, you're sinning again. That pulls you right back down into, you're almost worthy of hell because you're sinning again. So even people that called me too, they invite me to church meetings for a while and stuff like that. Like, so-and-so church meetings are happening this weekend. And I remember even one time I told a relative too, I said, I'll tell you what, I said, because when they have church meetings, whether it's spring, fall meetings, it goes on for many days and it's twice a day. So I told them, I said, you know what? I said, I'll come to every single church meeting if you'll sit down with me for an hour and a half and listen to me tell you why it's not correct. And I figured that's going to get them to leave me alone. And because a friend of mine that had left the church years before me had told me he did that with a relative and they left him alone after that. So I did it. And then they're like, well, they're sitting bargaining, well, if it gets too stressful, can we stop, when you're talking? So I said, you know what? I said, really, I'm not going to do this to you because I said, I know that you're fully in the church. You're stuck in there. Your father-in-law's a missionary preacher. I know you're probably stuck in there for life. And I'm not going to put this knowledge that I've learned into your head because it could ruin your life. So I was like, you might as well stay where you're at and I'll just leave you alone. But no, I'm not coming to church meetings. The only way I ever would go there is just because out of curiosity to hear what they're saying, the new stuff and the new type of sins they're pounding on and stuff like that. But wow. So then it's like after my wife leaves, it's like her friends, like especially the love bombing phase is pretty ridiculous because they'll tell you everything you want to hear. They'll have friends. They'll tell you, "I'll be there for you always," and I know you and your Christian heart and blah blah blah. The moment she said, I'm not comfortable here anymore and I'm not going to go anymore, right away she's told, you're following your husband instead of God. You're putting your husband above God. And then they're like, don't talk to me or don't call me, don't text me. People telling her you're going to hell. The gates of heaven are going to slam in your face when you die. Saying all these cruel things to her and stuff like that. And it's like, that shows you right there. I said, the way they behaved shows you that they did not have unconditional love for you.
Of
I said, it was
course.
love with conditions. Only if you believe this, because the moment you say that you're leaving that church, you are seen differently. That divide is just slammed right there. You are a worldly. You're not worthy of heaven. You're looked down upon. And I said, it's heartbreaking to think that you've known these people for decades. You thought they were your friends. Turns out you know exactly what their true nature is. And I said, and that is exactly what I find so problematic with these high control religions and cults. That is why I've continued over the years. Like, I've been active in those, like I said, in those social media things. I've done interviews, I've recorded videos, stuff like that. I've been very outspoken about it. And it's not anything for myself. It's only so I can validate the experiences of people that are ex-Listadians like myself. So I
Hmm.
can say that you're not crazy. These, or when you're treated this way, they'll try to. And when I say gaslighting, it's not the intense gaslighting. Like, I think gaslighting is just a little too much. It's more the pop psychology version of gaslighting when I say gaslighting. But they'll try to invalidate your experience to say, no, that's not what we believe, or that's not what we think. So usually in those instances, I'll provide specific examples. So, like, social media, you're not supposed to be on social media if you're a Christian, the true Christian from the church. Well, there's tons of people, tons of people have social media. You'll see a lot of dummy accounts too, where they have like sometimes not even a picture.
Right.
So it's like you're getting gaslit where they say, no, we can have social media. It's like, okay, your missionary preacher said this specifically. He said, a Christian should not have social media. It's disobedience for a Christian to have social media. And that Christian should repent of that disobedience. So I'll put those things in the comment sections when they try to gaslight you to say, no, we can be on here. I'm like, go ask this specific preacher because he's the one who preached it. Well, they never will come back and say, like, oh, I went and asked him or that. I was like, they're afraid to ask him because I was there when he preached that and I heard it.
Yeah.
And you're not going to tell me, you're not going to validate what I heard. So even when it comes to beliefs, a lot of times they'll try to act like they're not as, like, there are other people outside of the church that are saved. It's more the hand wavy thing where we don't know if somebody else out there in the world has that true understanding and that breaking of the heart and their, you know, cleanses their soul and their, forgiveness of sins. So we can't say, so that's the way hand wavy to say, like, no, we don't believe, only our church does. But yeah, that belief is the only way, because if that's tied from Jesus all the way straight to that church, even if a guy is in Brazil or here or there, they may think, well, there are some people that may have those same thoughts or beliefs as us, so we can't say we're the only ones. But it's very, like, you're telling me my experiences, what saw my entire life of the judgment of people outside of the church. You're trying to invalidate that. And I know that that's not correct because I've heard it my whole life. And I know what you've all said behind closed doors. I've been in those living rooms. I've been in the church. So, like, when you try to act out to the world to see, no, we're not like that, I'm like, that's not truthful.
Yeah.
And I can prove it's not truthful. So stuff like that, just, I said, I'm out there being a social justice warrior for ex-Listadians. Like, you deserve justice. When they gaslight you, I'll be there.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. Where are you at today with your wife, and how's your life now as far as leaving it? Maybe tell us a little bit about how life is good, or how are things different?
So yeah, once we were out, we had to. I felt like at the time, like, I could kind of sense that my wife still needed like a landing pad, because she was
Right.
still a believer. We tried a couple other churches. We went to one that had it was very much music based. It's like lots of music. They like, I mean, I think the preacher there liked to play guitar and sing. So it's like always trying to incorporate that into things. It was a little too much of a culture shock when you're coming from like music is a sin and repent of that to the guys, this church like to be jamming and stuff. Which I mean, for myself, I didn't have a problem with. It's just that when they started preaching and you heard more of the us versus them preaching again, and saying the world this and world that. I'm like, I just don't like this, But my wife didn't like it either because of the cult. I mean, it was okay, but didn't fit us. And then I knew there was another church that some of my friends that were ex-Listadians, that were ex-Old Apostolic Lutheran, like myself, went to this other church that was still in that apostolic, almost an offshoot of like the Listadian movement, but more distance, but still in that apostolic faith. So we went there for a while. But that was I got more of a political culty vibe from that one. It was less the religious stuff, but more of the right-wing culty feel that I wasn't comfortable with, but I still would have kept going there. But then when COVID shut down the churches, that's when we just started from home, and then we watched like this church from home on the computer. But at that point, I was 99.9% no longer believer. Like I said, I just learning so much about, not learning how like this story in the Bible is actually ripped from this story from thousands of years ago or whatever, stuff like that. It's like all that stuff. I just knew too much of that stuff anymore where I'm not a believer anymore. So, and then during the COVID time, since we were locked down and I was here in my office all the time, I had podcasts going just steady all day because I'm working from home. I got podcasts going all day. I'm just jumping into your lives, multiple times a week and stuff. And it's just like at some point you get to a point where I have to acknowledge who I am, and I am not a religious person anymore. I'm not. I know who I am based on evidence.
Do you feel like psychologically, because you bring up psychology, that you feel happier?
Oh, much. Like not, and they'll say this too. Like he's not truly happy.
Of course they do, but I don't care I don't care what they say. They're full of shit and they don't realize it. Yeah. I'm asking Ricky, my friend.
My answer to that, and what I'll say in different social media things too related to the religion is, I have reflected on this and spent a lot of time and a lot of hours chewing over this stuff. And I am genuinely like free of mind and happy. And even back in 2018, 2019, when I had educated myself out of this and understood the psychology of human behavior and groupthink and all this stuff, even at that point, I no longer had any fear of like hell, because I took the time to examine, where do these hell ideas come from? And it's like, there's Old Testament, okay, no hell in there. All this influence from hell, you go to Greek side of it and you get some of the stuff, whether it's Plato or you get Dante's Inferno, all this stuff, all these versions of hell that they were preaching about in Sunday grew over time. And it's like, this is a man-made construct. And so like when I educate my way out of that, I've never had any of that feel of worry of hell at all, like zero. And and this ties into what I was saying earlier too about some of the people that come out but still move into other religions or things like that, is some of them still really wrestle with that fear of hell.
Right.
And I constantly like say, read things that make you afraid to read, read books like Bart Ehrman's Heaven and Hell, read books like, Armageddon from Bart Ehrman, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And you understand like these ideas came from somebody and grew. And based on a personality type, this version of hell is based on like what this person's been conditioned to believe in this personality type from this guru or prophet or something like that.
Right.
And so don't take their word for it. And I always tell people, don't take my word for any of this at all. Look for yourself.
Exactly.
Don't believe me at all. Just look and read. It depends on if you want to put the time in. If you put the time in, you can erase like the fear of hell and all that stuff.
Absolutely. That's what happened with me.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
I've got a script right now I'm actually cooking up. You saw my stream the other day, I'm sure. Where the hell did hell come from
yeah,
is what I
yeah.
called it. And or at least that's the script that I'm working on right now. I might go with a different title to make sure that it doesn't get limited by YouTube, but I'm going to be cooking ancient stuff. I mean, we're going back to Egypt. We're going back to all these way older civilizations, way older ideas, and they had many gods and they had all sorts of stuff that you would never hear at your church or even in regular Sunday
Yeah,
school.
never. Like I said, it was mind blowing when I started, and it's not like somebody's telling me this and I was believing them, and you were, and these scholars were preaching to me, and I
No,
accepted what they say. No, I went and looked, and that
exactly.
was the most. That was the interesting thing is to go look, and it's like I'm not accepting. I'm not accepting. Believe, and the understanding will come later. I'm like, I am in charge of myself. I can go look. I can
Exactly.
look and see the actual text. And even when I am watching those videos or anything that you have or other channels have, I have pieces of paper like this. I'm taking notes while I'm working and stuff, and I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of notes of stuff.
Yeah.
And I just keep throwing. I see that dresser behind me. It's
Let me pull
full
you
of
from
notes.
screen. That
It's
dresser's
like
full of notes.
full of notes. And one day I'm going to compile all this stuff into a book where I
Good.
relate not into my like Listadian upbringing, how I got educate my way out of that, and also going to incorporate into like not just the religious but also political stuff
Yep.
too, like the cult of cults of politics and all that. The dogma, all those things, it's all the same. The psychology of the religion and the politics is all the same.
Yeah.
And so it's like I pivoted. Not only did I pivot out of this high control religion slash cult, which people take issue with cult, but cult is descriptive. It's not a pejorative. It's descriptive. You can go through
It
these
can be, but
metrics, and
yeah.
well, it can be, but you can go through this. I mean, a lot of people take it as an offense, but I mean, the script you can describe, go through a whole list of things with different metrics and find like, does this, you know, meet the definition of a cult, which I did with my religion, and it met the definition of it.
Yeah.
Um,
For
and
sure.
so it's like I just keep taking all these notes, writing all these things down, and it's like you can educate your way out of these things. And I always tell people, knowledge is power. Just you can just keep learning, keep growing. It takes a lot of work. You got to put a lot of time into it. I guess it also helps if you're a little bit of a geek and you get fired up about something that's a lot of people consider nerdy or something. But I mean, to
Right.
me, it's fascinating because it's a part of my story and my existence. You know, it's like, would I have rather grown up in a household where there was none of that involved? Yeah, but it was, and it's part of my life. And like, I don't have any people like to throw out the word bitter too. You know, if you question the religion you came out of, they'll say, well, he's bitter, or hand wavy, bitter. You know, no bitterness at all. What happened happened. I grew up in this environment. There's times where I might have a little bit of grief. I missed out on playing football or things like that. Things that would have meant a lot to me, but it's never like weighed me down or never got mad or upset or anything. I just think it is what it is. This happened. I can only go from this point forward. So even like 5, 6 years ago, I thought I'm in a good spot and I feel so much better than I did before. But as I said, as each year went on, I grew more and more and more and learned more. And like I said, the last year is where like everything just like I have a better relationship with my wife. We're just like I feel like I love hanging out. Like my youngest daughter's a lot like me. She's just been she's my horror movie and sci-fi buddy and superhero buddy and all this stuff. But it's like the little things in life, like all that stuff is like I have all these things that I was juggling in my brain before are all gone and it's all focused now on. And which I was happy that you had had Britt Hartley on recently, because a
Yeah.
couple months ago I was going to message you and say please have her on because I've been following her for a while. And when she describes like her sandcastles of meaning, that was how I identified that I lived my life by, but I didn't have the right words. And when I heard her describe like how she lives her life, I'm like, that she put words, she's a lot smarter than I am. So she put the exact words to like how do I feel and live my life. And it's like I found exactly what is me and what it means most to me. And like now it's like from that point forward, the rest of my life, I just want to focus on these things that, and no more outside distractions, nothing, not trying to chase anything or figure anything out. It's like I know what means the most to me. And it's like I want to make sure I establish the best relationships I can with the people closest to me and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's funny that I left religion to find that when most people would say, like, you need religion. And it was actually getting out of it is what made me feel whole. And
That's my experience. That's
yeah,
my experience. And now I'm free to honestly explore whatever, including ideas that, who knows? I mean, Eastern philosophies. Is there more? Of course, I'm more scientific minded, which anchors me to being more
yeah,
factual and rigorous, but
yeah,
I am open to data, evidence, whatever can be shown. And I'm like you. I found myself and at peace and all that distractive trauma, if you will, if we can call it that, the issues, the chains that we had, the struggle between our bodies and reality and all that was going on, all that's gone now. I mean,
yeah.
there's so much more peace. um Ricky, is there something you must get off your chest? Because I wanted to get you to maybe speak to someone out there who might be going through it themselves, some advice from you, because you've gained some wisdom in life
Yeah.
through, going through this. Anything before that I have to say this, or do you want to just go ahead and give someone advice as we wrap things up?
I would say, I mean, as I said earlier too, the knowledge is power thing. Reality test your life. Reality test the things that you believe. It's scary when you come across evidence that refutes something that you've believed or held a belief in for years or decades, or it's become your identity. It can be scary, but I've taught and trained myself to not fear when I see something that may trigger a bias in me or something like that. Instead, I want to run towards it, and I want to figure out what is this? Why did this feeling come up? Why did I think this? And so it's like, just, I mean, I've said it over and over in some of the videos. I started a channel recently called The Cult Yard. So and on there I share not only from a Listadian perspective, but it's more going to be like talking about psychology of groupthink and from a layman's perspective. I'm not a
Right.
professional PhD. I've learned a lot too from Mormon Stories podcast. John Dehlin, I don't know if you ever had one hit with him, but he's
I haven't yet.
amazing. You should. That would be amazing. I'd be geeking out for that one. But he did actually. If I would have been a little bit of a younger man, I would have done what he did, where he left his corporate job and he studied psychology to get his PhD specifically to help ex-Mormons because he got excommunicated from
Wow.
the church. And that's one of those things too, is like, if I would have been just a little sweet spot, if I'd have been maybe left the church maybe 5 years sooner, I think I would have tackled that. But it's such a good place in my career that I can't really do that. So I'm in a layman's effort, I'm going to explain the psychology of groupthink. It's going to be 90% related to religious cults and stuff like that. But I'm also going to talk about a little bit related to political cults and things like that. And like I said, knowledge is power. Just keep learning, keep growing, and reality test your world. Don't be afraid. You just don't be afraid. Clear mind is just, I tell myself, I mean, tell my wife this. She's probably getting sick of hearing it, but every couple of days I'm like, I cannot believe, I never thought there'd be a day where I felt like this. Like for 40 years, like from 5-6 years old till 40-ish, my mind was always like fighting and battling. I never felt happy. I was a miserable SOB sometimes. And I'm like, I never thought I'd feel like this. It's just amazing. I got to pinch myself. Like, is this real? Is this real?
Yeah. It's like you got really born again. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what it is. It's like hopefully I live another, a long life till 80 or whatever, but I'm gonna appreciate every day from when I got out of that dogma till then. I'm gonna appreciate every day because I did something. And a lot of people don't make it out of religious or political cults. And I just think I'm one of the small percentage, and I am so thankful.
Wow. Ricky, you're the man. By the way, topic discussed. Gary in the house. Gary's an ex-Mormon as well. And powerful story. Good friend of mine. Very smart guy. We're going to have him on at some point to dive into his story as well. Thank you so much, Gary, for the super chat. Really appreciate you hanging out in the comment section here. Look, Ricky, I really appreciate you having the courage coming on here to share your story. For those who might want to share their story, I'm going to let you do the advertising. You were probably a bit nervous, as usual. Anyone would be, to come onto a channel to share these things, or even get in front of many people who might see it. What's your advice to someone out there who might have a deconversion story that what would you say to that person who might be interested in telling it?
Yeah, I would say just do it, and it's always scary leading up to it, but then once the camera pops on, I didn't realize that 2 hours went by like in a minute. I could go on for many more hours, but people get bored. So,
well, you and I could always do follow-up episodes too, and go deeper into the weeds on.
We probably should someday. Yeah, like
absolutely,
we should do, because I think about most of these interviews they do with other people, there's still so much more you could talk about. It just, like I said, you could go on for hours and hours and hours. So, it'd be interesting to get more deeper into the history, like the Listadian history, and where that came from, that idea of being the one true saving faith, and the awakening, and the path that leads to eternal life, and phobia, indoctrination. There's so many things you could talk about. So
all of it.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ricky, show him some love in the comments. If you're watching this later, drop a comment down below. Give our guests some love, encouragement, positivity. It always helps motivate. And, it should make you feel good that you're really making someone else feel good. That's one way to give: free. Like the videos, free. Share the videos, free. Subscribe, free. We have other options. You can support what we're doing there at Myth Vision by joining the Patreon. You can go sign up for one of the courses that my wife ends up running the site at mvp-courses.com with a bunch of academics. Become a member on YouTube. There's other ways that cost. And I think there's a way to hype videos. If you want to promote this story, you can hype this episode and get it in front of more people online. Ricky, thank you so much, brother.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Let's do this again.
Sure. Got to.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are Myth Vision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.